Welcome students to lesson 7 of the Urban World topic. In this series of lessons we are exploring life in a NEE urban area, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. In the last lesson you will recall that we looked at the challenges of life in the poorest parts of cities in Brazil, the favelas. And in this lesson we're going to explore a strategy that was taken up by Rio de Janeiro to try to reduce the problems for people living in favelas. Join me. Please write the date, title and learning objective and have a pen and paper ready to learn. Time to review prior learning. Please write 1 to 10, answer the questions from memory and then mark your answers. Game time. Number 1. What is the average homicide rate in Rio's favelas per 100,000 people? It's about 50 per 100,000 per year. 2. A squatter settlement is an illegal one that is usually made of makeshift materials. 3. Gangs attract poor children to leave school early as they provide an alternative income source. 4. Rio's large energy company, Petrobras, provides many jobs in the formal economy. 5. Rio's finance sector is also important as banks provide loans to people to start or improve businesses. 6. Tourism is a major part of Rio's fame and economy due to carnivals, beaches and famous landmarks. 7. The main economic sector in cities is the tertiary sector. 8. The Amazon Fund is an international agreement between Norway, Germany and Brazil to reduce deforestation in exchange for money and training. 9. Cutting down certain aging trees and allowing the forest to regrow is called selective logging. 10. Ecotourism leads to higher local incomes in countries with rainforests, for example as tour guides, and reduces deforestation. Give yourselves a mark out of 10. If you got 8 or more, fantastic work. Test yourselves on any questions that you got wrong in a week's time to help you recall them. To introduce the solution to the challenges of life in Rio's favelas, I'm going to show you a photo and some questions around it. Please answer those questions using your understanding. Here's the photo. Here are the questions. Okay, number 1. How might this type of transportation help people, especially those in favelas? So this is a cable car that was built in Complexo de Alemão favela, which is in the north of Rio. Well, you may have said that it might be quicker than travelling by car or walking through the favelas themselves. If you were thinking more detail, you may have said it's safer because you don't have to walk through gang-ridden neighbourhoods. You may also say that it takes people to areas where there are jobs, so they can have a higher income. Question 2. Why might it be especially useful in a favela? Well, the key idea here, and one of the reasons why it was built, is because it overcomes the problem of congestion from the narrow streets, but also crime, keeps people safe. 3. What else could the money have been spent on to improve lives? This construction was expensive. What else could it have been spent on? You may have said education, training teachers, hospitals or doctors. You may have said money for equipment to build better houses or better infrastructure such as sewers and electricity or internet. All these things could have also been invested in instead of the cable car. 4. Why do most HIC cities not have slums? Slum is a general term for a poor neighbourhood that is illegal, but favela is the Brazilian term. Well, you should have said that most HIC cities lack slums for a few reasons. Number 1, they're not growing very fast, and so the government has enough time to invest in affordable housing. Number 2, people have high enough incomes to be able to spend money on proper housing. Number 3, you may have said that the cities and HICs are often planned before the people move in because of good government planning, and so the cities are able to invest in adequate housing and transport infrastructure. Consequently, there are few slums in HIC cities. Okay. In this lesson, we're going to explore a project called the Favela Bairro Project. Bairro means neighbourhood. And it was a project that began in 1993 and is ongoing today. And you're going to see what happened and the extent to which it actually helped improve people's lives, especially in this favela here, Complexo de Alemão, in the north of Rio de Janeiro. So the key word is an urban planning scheme. Can you please write this phrase and its definition? Okay, so what is an urban planning scheme? Here is a picture of part of Barcelona in Spain, Spain's biggest city. Now look at it. What you'll notice immediately is how organized it all looks. All the houses in grids, patterns like this, everything perfectly organized, all the streets in rows. All the buildings seem to be similar in design. There's green space in the middle, there's a diagonal road going across, some sort of stadium here. Everything seems to be very organized. So if we go back, an urban planning scheme improving the lives of people in a city, this is an example of urban planning. It's called Example, EIXAMPLE in Barcelona, and it is a planned city district. It was built before people moved in, and it was built to help make sure that people's lives were good when they lived there. So how does it do that? In a few important ways. First of all, transport is key in a city. And so when this district of Barcelona Example was designed, the roads that go straight through the neighborhoods were designed to be limited to traffic, so not many cars could drive through. Some of them are complete pedestrian zones, no cars are allowed. And across the Example district is a diagonal main thoroughfare, that's a large road, where the largest traffic can go. This keeps the main neighborhoods quiet, but allows transport to move easily through the neighborhood. Transport's an important part of an urban planning scheme. It allows people to get to work. It allows businesses to transport goods. What else does an urban planning scheme have? Employment. Jobs need to be available in a city to prevent crime, to give people good incomes, to improve standard of living. And so, in an urban planning scheme, businesses are attracted to an area, and governments do things to ensure that businesses come to an area. For example, they try to prevent crime, or they set up factories, or they make sure there's excellent infrastructure. A car factory such as this Nissan factory in Barcelona requires electricity, clean water supply, and other things to be able to run effectively. So urban planning ensures those services are available. Additionally, housing needs to be excellent. In Example, many houses look like this. They're light, they all have electricity, they all have clean running water and sewers. They provide an excellent quality of life. Urban planning ensures that everyone is able to have affordable quality housing like this. And overall, quality of life is aimed to improve. But there's one final element. People in cities need green spaces. So Example was planned with these green parks put all across it, so that people wouldn't just have to stay within their homes, but they could go to parks to reduce stress and exercise. And these are the four main elements of an urban planning scheme. Elements that improve transport, housing, jobs, and quality of life. This is a particularly effective example of an urban planning scheme taking place in a European country, Spain. So let me show you what they've done in Rio de Janeiro, a NEE, in Brazil. Okay. So what is the Favela Bairro Project? Well, since favelas have grown from the 1950s and onwards, the government of Rio de Janeiro has recognized the need to improve the lives of people living there. Because of crime, because of unemployment, because of pollution. There's an imperative, which means it's necessary, to improve the lives of people living in favelas. And this is the Favela Bairro Project. It's an example of an urban planning scheme to improve the lives of the poor people in the city of Rio de Janeiro. It focused on a number of favelas, mostly in the north of the city, but in particular Complexo de Alemão, one of the largest favelas in the city, with more than 100,000 people living there. It's a sprawling area of closely packed homes like this, some of them more modern, some of them very, very basic. And it desperately needed help. Quality of life was low because of crime and other things. So let me show you. Complexo de Alemão is located here, this group of favelas in the north of the city, near an industrial area but far from the old, affluent centre of the city. It's disconnected by transport, it's on a hilly relief, and it's got high rates of crime and poverty. So let's start with crime. The largest and most notorious, which is badly regarded gang in Rio de Janeiro is the Red Command, and they are said to rule Complexo de Alemão. Police don't even venture there because there are so many gangs who make life dangerous for people. How do they rule the community? Well, for example, they would extort people, so they'd go up to people in their shops, business owners, and force them to pay them money. If they didn't, they would either hurt them or destroy their shop. Crime prevented people from investing in Rio. So, what did the Favela Bairro Project involve? The first thing that needed to be done was to reduce crime in Complexo de Alemão. Only then could the other interventions be possible. So, as part of the Favela Bairro Project, the Brazilian government sent in UPPs. They are police pacifying units. In Portuguese, this translates as UPP. Armed companies of soldiers moved into Complexo de Alemão and stayed there. And they worked on the streets and set up headquarters in the neighborhood. This prevented gangs from operating with guns in the streets, and they flushed out gangs from the buildings and forced them to leave the area. The result of the UPPs intervening in Complexo de Alemão was a dramatic and swift reduction in crime rates, especially violent crime and the presence of gangs. The involvement of the UPPs allowed the other parts of the Favela Bairro Project to go ahead, namely, the need to deal with unemployment. So how was this done? The UPPs helped make Complexo de Alemão safer by reducing the likelihood people would be extorted or burgled or assaulted or murdered. Businesses were increasingly attracted to Complexo de Alemão. So it reduced unemployment. Additionally, after the UPPs were built, housing was able to be improved. The Brazilian government sent in construction companies, and affordable housing was built in Complexo de Alemão. Smallish apartment blocks, but those that were made of quality materials and had running water and electricity and internet. Additionally, transport was improved. Streets were widened and paved with tarmac across the favela. This allowed businesses to move goods to and from the port much more easily. It allowed people living in the favelas to get to the center of Rio, where high-paid jobs in the formal economy, such as in Grupo Globo, the big communications company, or in Petrobras, the big energy company, are based. And finally, quality of life. If you remember the example in Barcelona, they increased the amount of green space. This was done in Complexo de Alemão as well. In Brazil, people are obsessed with football, and so football pitches and other green spaces were built in between and amongst these houses. This caused the land to be more spread out and caused housing to be more spread out, but it allowed people to exercise and to be able to have recreation. This combination of making the area safer, improving housing, transport, and adding green spaces had a significant effect on life in Complexo de Alemão. But the final piece, the showpiece of the project, the one that was shown off at the Rio Olympics, was the transportation improvement of the cable car in Complexo de Alemão. This expensive, significant project transported people for free who lived in Complexo de Alemão from the center of the favela to the outskirts and to the center of Rio, to the port, as you can see in this photo, where the high-paid jobs are located. It significantly reduced journey time for the many people who commuted every day, and it reduced the number of muggings of people when they were trying to get to work. It made their journeys safer. This combination of activities enacted by the Favela Bairro Project helped improve people's lives, as you will see. Why? Because it opened up access to better jobs in the center of the city, such as at Petrobras in the expensive central zone of Rio. With those higher paid jobs, people were able often to bring money back to their community to invest in their housing and in their children's education, among other things. So let's find out just how successful this project was. Look carefully though here, before we move on. What else is needed? What else is needed to improve the lives of people? Well, it's not just what's on top of the ground, but what's under the ground that's needed. Sewers and clean water supply are a key element that's missing from people's homes in favelas because the government didn't plan to build there. And additionally, the definition of a squatter settlement, that it's illegal, prevents people from wanting to improve their homes often because they fear they might be evicted or their home demolished at any time. So the Favela Bairro Project gave many people who lived in favelas the right to buy their land and own it, thereby making them legal dwellers, people living there, and therefore they couldn't be evicted. By allowing people to buy their land on which they lived, this encouraged them to improve their homes. So, how successful has the Favela Bairro Project been? Well, it cost $600 million. It started in 1993 and it's taken various names over the course of its life, and various mayors, people who run Rio de Janeiro, have taken control of it. And efforts to improve it and make it go faster have increased and decreased over time. Let me show you what effect that's had. Well, the UPPs have led to significant reduction in crime rates, especially in the first few years after they were introduced. The first UPPs were introduced around 2009 in favelas like Rocinha, but also in Complexo de Alemão slightly later. And this led to almost a 50% decrease in homicide rates, murder rates, during that time period, from 2010 to 2017. As a result of the reduced crime, businesses were attracted. More than 150 new businesses from Rio de Janeiro and international businesses have now set up offices within Complexo de Alemão that weren't there before. For example, computer companies that train people in coding and how to use computers and software and how to manage their business and their IT part of their business have set up there. This gives higher paid job opportunities to people in Complexo de Alemão, like this gentleman here. Higher paid jobs gives people more money, allows them to improve their homes, to invest in their new livelihood because they now own the land in which they live, and it attracts further business because of the multiplier effect. If you have more skilled people here, then more businesses want to set up because they know there are more employees. That happened. Housing also improved. This has led to better health of people. For example, favelas and their squatter settlement houses often have leaky roofs, often have mold and damp due to the hot climate in Rio. This affects people's lungs and it causes them to get sick more easily. Health improves when sanitation improves in housing, when there are better toilets, when there are more sewers. Consequently, life expectancy has increased in Complexo de Alemão, and the rate of people visiting the doctor for waterborne diseases, so diseases that are spread by dirty water in Complexo de Alemão, have fallen. Visits to the doctor for those reasons have fallen. This is also because better sewers have been constructed in Complexo de Alemão, like this. Official, formal sewers buried underground that cannot leak into the streets and into people's homes when it rains very hard. That's an important investment. Infrastructure improvements such as these have a dramatic effect on people's health in Rio de Janeiro. However, as I mentioned, many different mayors have been in charge of the Favela Bairro Project over its life, and some of them have believed less in paying for it. Consequently, and also owing to the lack of training and skills given to the local people, much of the infrastructure that was developed in Complexo de Alemão, such as the sewers, have begun to be unmaintained, and so they've become derelict, run down. The sewers get blocked up and broken because rubbish is piled into them and they're not cleaned. The houses are derelict and run down, the concrete might be peeling away, or the roof might be leaking again. Electricity cable lines may have collapsed. Waste is not being removed at the same rate that it used to be. And as a result of this lack of maintenance, the standards of sanitation that were very high when these infrastructure projects were installed initially are no longer so high. Another problem is this. When you reduce crime in a place, when you improve housing in a place, you attract more people to live there. And when more people live there, unless you add a significant number of houses, house prices rise. That has happened in Complexo de Alemão, where house prices have risen by up to 40%. As a result, because people have quite low incomes in Complexo de Alemão, often an average of $240 a month, they cannot afford to live there anymore. And so they move out into poorer, less improved favelas like the Mare favela just to the east. Mare spelled M-A-R-E. This issue is a result of a lack of government investment in new affordable housing. While I mentioned that they have improved some houses, that are nowhere near enough to account for this rise in house prices brought about by better infrastructure, safety, and businesses. What about transport? Transport has been improved. For example, the cable car was an excellent investment in many ways. As I said, it has reduced crime rates and people affected by muggings when they travel to work. It has also reduced air pollution in the favelas, as there are fewer cars. However, in order for people to take advantage of the cable car to the center of Rio to get those high-paid jobs, they would need education. Skills such as maths and science and articulate speaking skills, practice in these skills and university degrees are important and essential to be able to get those jobs. The Favela Bairro Project did not give people enough education training. It did not improve schools enough, it did not improve adult education enough, and consequently, not as many people as were predicted actually took the cable car to the centre to get jobs because they couldn't. They lacked the skills. Just because you can get to an office job doesn't mean you can actually get that job itself. If you lack the skills, you won't be able to, and that's exactly what happened for many people. Finally, the project remains incomplete. A number of people that have ruled Rio de Janeiro, for example Marcelo Crivella, the latest mayor of Rio, didn't believe in the project's effectiveness as much as other mayors, and so they invested less in completing it. This is an image of Complexo de Alemão today. You have the cable car, but beneath it you have waste building up, and you have many incomplete, low-quality houses. And so some people who were more educated and skilled benefited from the project, but others who lacked those skills did not. And so we can say that overall, the Favela Bairro Project did help in some ways to reduce crime and to improve housing, but because of a lack of government investment over time in the things that people really need to be able to get jobs and the things that reduce crime, it will not be sustainable, which means it will not last unless investments in better infrastructure and better training especially happen in the future. Okay, time to assess learning. Question 1. What is an urban planning scheme? You should have said that an urban planning scheme is an attempt by a government to improve the lives of people in a city. Question 2. Why is it essential to provide training and education if urban planning is going to be effective in improving people's lives? You could have said a number of points here, but education allows people to access high-paid jobs, thereby reducing unemployment. Education, since it improves access to high-paid jobs, reduces crime. Additionally, education attracts businesses because businesses set up in places where there are high-skilled employees. That's why London has so many big companies. It's why New York has so many big companies. And it's why the centre of Rio de Janeiro has so many big companies, because that's where the most skilled, wealthy people live. Finally, why do you think the cable car was built? Why was more money spent on the cable car rather than, for example, education and sewers in the Favela Bairro Project? Well, the key reason, it seems, is that the government of Brazil wanted a visible example of the Favela Bairro Project so that people around the world and in Rio could see it. And the cable car was a very obvious example of an improvement, whereas you can't see sewers and you can't see education. It was believed that the government would be more popular if they had a visible project such as the cable car. And it's often regarded as a waste of money because education and better infrastructure such as sewers, would have been a better use of the money? Time to embed learning. Please answer these questions from memory and using your understanding from this lesson, and then mark your answers. So 1. Urban planning schemes, 2 features. Any 2 of these. 2. Why are cities in NEEs often more in need of urban planning than those in HICs? Any of these points. Population growth or effective urban design. 3. 2 reasons why Complexity at Alamau may have been chosen. Any 2 of these. So population, crime, its location, and quality of life. And finally, 2 ways the Favela Bairro Project has improved the lives of the urban poor, so poor people in the city of Rio. Any 2 of these. Make sure that you use the keywords that I'm using, such as contamination, commuting, education, employment, investment, key ideas like that. Please give yourselves a mark out of 14 and add any corrections in green pen or any parts that you missed. From the lesson, write 2 questions. Answer them from memory. Test yourselves on these questions in a week's time to make sure you understand them. Most importantly, above all, if you didn't perform effectively in the try questions, in a week's time, come back to the explanation and then attempt them again to see if you've improved. Doing this repeatedly will help you understand it and write more clearly about it. Thank you.